Welcome to the Ace Trainer podcast. Gabe and I have been friends for a while, and we're always yapping about Pokemon. So we figured we could just start a podcast, especially NAIC just finished. So we're going to be talking about that today. Also, we're going to be talking about Worlds and our thoughts on both the format of the tournament and the new cards out of Shrouded Fable. Gabe, how you doing today?
I'm doing all right. Just got back from New Orleans a couple of days ago. Kind of feels weird to have a couple months off. We got League Cup starting in a few weeks at the very beginning of July, so I'm definitely excited to, kind of get back on the grind. But I'm excited for some time off. Definitely going to relax, kind of recharge for the next season. So, but yeah, no, I'm feeling pretty good.
Yeah, it is kind of weird. We kind of got a month here with no tournaments. I mean, I have some local 1Ks to play in, but no big tournaments to prep for. So I guess we can talk about NAIC. I mean, both of us played Guardy to NAIC, and I mean, we saw 6 of the top 8 decks were Gardevoir. So I can't help but think that we made a good call. Obviously, worked out a little bit better for you. Why don't you just get into your run? Maybe I can talk briefly a bit after about my 5-4, but yeah, tell me about your run. How was the deck?
Yeah, so I ended up going 9-0-6, so I didn't actually lose a game. I just tied 6 rounds, which is kind of a problem sometimes when you play the deck, and I got uh, the full treatment of tying a lot of times with the deck that can sometimes be a little bit slow. But yeah, the deck felt, really, really strong. I think one of the most interesting things was seeing that there were 6 Gardevoirs in top 8, but they all were pretty significantly different. Like we saw
Hmm.
some of the Gardevoir builds had the Hyper Aroma. Some of them had the TM, the Evolution as well. Some of them had the Stamp. Some of them had multiple of the Monkey Dory. So there were a lot of really cool things that I saw from the top 8 lists. I ended up playing a pretty standard build. I cut the Radiant Greninja. It seems like the majority of top people who brought the Gardevoir deck chose to keep the Radiant Greninja. I ended up
Hmm.
taking it out of my deck. Shout out to Rowan for saying the card was bad. The main reason why you don't really want the Radiant Greninja is versus matchups like the Lost Zone Toolbox matchup and specifically the Mirror match as well. You don't really have a whole lot of bench space for that card. So that was another reason as to why I just was like, I'm not really using this card enough. I know that you cut the Manaphy from the deck. I decided to keep it in. I didn't honestly run into a whole lot of situations where the Manaphy was actually super strong. However, I'm not exactly sure whether or not my opponents would have played, slightly differently. Like if the Manaphy like wasn't there. So it's kind of hard for me to, I guess, like figure out exactly like, okay, this was a card that should have been in the deck or should like not have been. So that was, kind of something that I'm still not 100% certain on. But yeah, finished off with, I believe, 27th place out of almost 2,700 people is pretty cool. And
Yeah,
I'm
pretty
excited
close.
for Worlds. Definitely got some momentum now. So.
Yeah. I mean, you touched upon a lot of ideas there that I kind of want you to talk more about. First of all, the ties. How did you approach this tournament playing Gardevoir in time? Like, were you looking to play one game? Were you looking to play three? And how did you manage your time so that you didn't end up with too many accidental ties?
Yeah, so a couple of my ties were unintentional. One of my ties versus Lost Zone Toolbox, I had game and I didn't see it, and I accidentally grabbed the wrong thing, so that caused a tie that probably shouldn't have happened. A couple other of my ties, I actually just was not drawing very well in game 3, so the game's just kind of naturally tied out.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting with Gardevoir because oftentimes you're faced with these situations where like game 1 takes maybe 25 to 30 minutes and you're like, okay, do I really want to go for the 1-0 or do I want to scoop super quickly like during that second game? So I think a lot of people are very pro like, okay, like you want to play fast, you want to scoop early, and then there's other people who are kind of like, okay, I just want to play one, super long game, play that game like super well, and then game 2 does not finish. So it's kind of
Mhm.
interesting. I'm kind of indifferent on it right now. I'm still trying to figure out what the best way to play it is. I know that you are someone who's typically trying to finish 3 games, and scooping early is something that I think that you've been pretty well known for with the deck. But yeah, I'm still kind of trying to figure it out because I'm not 100% sure. It also kind of depends on the metagame as well. So for example, I hit a couple of the Reggie Drago decks, and that deck goes like pretty quickly, and you pretty much win the game in like 3 attacks. So like those games, naturally end in like probably 4 to 5 turns anyway. So those are specific like types of matchups where you can more reasonably finish the 3 games. However, versus things like the Lost Zone toolboxes, for example, versus things like the Gardevoir mirror match, they just
Yeah.
naturally go pretty long. So sometimes it's kind of hard to make the full commitment to making sure that you win the set 1-0 or scooping really really quickly in game 1 or game 2.
Yeah, I know. We saw Isaiah Bradner versus Drew Hedrick in round 15 on stream, and they actually just agreed to play best of one, right? They needed a win to make top 8, and they were playing that slow matchup. I guess they didn't want to deal with any of the shenanigans. So Isaiah ended up losing, I think it was like a 27-minute game 1, and then he just scooped it up. That was the series. So that was kind of cool to see. I've definitely done that before in tournament, is just agree to play best of one with my opponents when the tie would screw us both. I think there's this interesting dynamic of like if you're going into game 3 with like 15 minutes left, naturally whoever starts losing game 3 is going to be inclined to try to slow it down and play for a draw, while the person in the winning position is always going to be pushing to finish the game.
Yeah.
And it really creates like a really tenuous game, right? It's like someone's always going to be upset. Whereas both players are playing within the rules of the game. So I don't really know what the solution is. I'm still trying to figure out what the optimal approach is. I know finishing 3 games leads to like nobody being upset, but it might not be the optimal approach. Something I'm definitely thinking about for Worlds.
Yeah.
I guess, yeah.
I ran into actually a situation where this exactly happened. So I ended up playing against the same person in day 1 and also day 2, and I ran into the situation where heading into game 3, there was about 10 minutes left, and I didn't really have like very much going. My hand was like super weak, and I was like, okay, I don't have to evolve into an EX, and they cannot physically take all 6 prize cards. Now, if I decided to play a normal game, go into something like the EX, then maybe they could have taken all 6 prize cards. But I'm just like sitting there being like, I can play at a reasonable pace and I don't really need to do anything, and the game's just going to naturally tie. And then the same thing happened in the second day, I think it was around 10, where they didn't have a great start, but they just didn't necessarily need to play the like they didn't need to play to win.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. So like it's like this really weird situation where it's like in the first day I was like, okay, I kind of got away with murder there. And then the second day, I'm just like, I just got screwed over. So I don't really know exactly like what the fix is. I know like some people, I think in some like other card games, instead of best of 3, they have best of, I think it's like to the first 5 turns after time is called. I think it's like +5. I know that's been kind of like an argument some people are like, is okay, maybe because I feel like there's like so many games that I feel like would finish if it was like time +5. Then again, that would also take kind of a lot of time, and then you kind of run into problems with like how long the events are actually going as well. So that's kind of another problem. But yeah, there were definitely plenty of situations where like I felt like, and due to the time constraints, you don't actually need to play to win in that last game if you aren't necessarily setting up super well. And I don't know exactly what the resolution is towards that. I know a lot of people have been having that kind of discourse. Some people want best of 1. Some people have been arguing for best of 2 as well. I think Disney Lorcana has been doing best of 2, which has been kind of controversial, as I know some people have actually tried it out, and they said best of 2 doesn't really work as well as some people might think. So it's really really interesting, and I think like the perfect example of this was on stream for round 15, just saying like, we're just going to play one super long game, we're going to play really well, and then because like if they ever try to play a full set, then they'd have to play probably significantly faster, which means they're probably not going to play as well. So there's a lot of kind of interesting things to consider. So
Yeah. And it's almost interesting. It creates, like you said, was it the same opponent you tied twice or different people?
Yes, it was the exact same opponent. Yeah.
Right. Right. So like if both of you scooped the one you were losing, both of you actually would have had more match points, right? Like if you went 1-1 instead of 0-2. So it's almost like a prisoner's dilemma where like if you both always agreed to not like play for the tie, in the long term you benefit. But if in the short term, whoever's losing is losing out on a match point. So people are always going to be playing for the tie, right? So I don't know.
It's a
Um,
slippery slope for sure. I mean, I don't know if there's
yeah,
a perfect answer for it.
yeah. I wouldn't mind to see like a best of one or best of two, or increase maybe like an increased timer for day two would be good. Like,
That's what I've been
um,
saying. I think that like the
yeah,
finals match, for example,
should just be untimed.
I think it should probably be best. So like untimed kind of creates a situation where I think it just becomes like so long. I think like best of three, maybe 80 minutes would probably fix a lot of issues, and then just like have a judge there to make sure like the pace of play is kept, because in multiple, like of those games, it didn't really seem like one person convincingly won. It's just that they won off the time, and that's, something that I'm personally not a big fan of, is when games I feel like should go one way and they finish, in a different way simply because of something like time. And I'm just like, I don't know if that's like real Pokemon. But then like you kind
Yeah,
of
it's not
yeah,
Pokemon.
yeah. But I think
Yeah.
the aspect of time is very interesting. I know it's been a very controversial thing throughout, honestly, the past like 12 months, because I know like Tord had his whole thing, and there's been like plenty of players who've kind of like dealt with like some of the time, problems and stuff like that. So I don't exactly know the resolution, but I definitely think maybe increasing time in Top Cut would be beneficial. Because like I think Worlds was also determined on time. I think that Tord would have
Yeah,
probably
it
won
was.
that game as well,
Mhm.
if that was a fully like finished game. So it just keeps happening, and I don't know exactly what the resolution is, but that would personally be what I would do. So
I think for now, the resolution as players is to just be aware that it's part of the game,
yeah,
and do everything we can to finish as many games that we want to finish. Right? Like if we think, like if you want to finish 3 games, you got to go fast from game one. It's not like you can't finish game two and go, oh crap, I have 10 minutes. Like by then it's too far gone, right? And if you are gonna play for those like 1-0s or like 1-1 stuff like that, I guess that's within the scope of the game, and just be able to do it to the best of your ability. Um, but otherwise, we saw Drew Hedrick. He took down the tournament with Lost Box, and both of us were staying with him. And neither of us, we had the Lost Box deck, but neither of us ended up playing it. So I'm going to ask you, do you wish that you played Drew Hedrick's Lost Box deck? Why or why not?
so the number one thing that I always like to stress, especially to my coaching students, is making sure that you find a deck that you feel fully comfortable with. I actually tested a lot of games of that build. I think I played like 20 games in like one night, and I think I went like maybe 18-2 or something like that. So like I had like a pretty solid record. However, I didn't necessarily feel like, I felt like I could make it to the second day with the deck, maybe go 6-2-1. However, I didn't necessarily feel 100% confident in like being able to pilot it to the level of Drew or some of the other people who chose to play the deck. So I really do think comfortability just means so much. Like Gardevoir has been a deck that I've played throughout the majority of the season. I've never missed a day two as well with it. I think I'm now 7 for 7 on day twos with the deck. So like it just like was a deck that I felt like I could play at a significantly higher level, and especially with these major tournaments, I felt like to get through the 15 rounds, I should just be playing the deck that I know the best. And that, kind of led to my decision. I don't really regret it. I remember we were talking about, I think like the night before, we were like, dang, they got a pretty good deck. So we were like, dang, like this deck
We
is
knew.
really good. But yeah,
Yeah.
that's kind of my answer to it. I feel totally fine. If I did, poorly with Gardevoir, I still would have felt pretty okay with my choice. So
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm on the same page. Even though like I did bad, um, I think I played the right deck. I think
six
like
and top
Drew's
eight,
deck,
like is good.
yeah,
Yeah.
6 in top 8.
Yeah.
I do think what broke that Lost Box deck though was the 4 Pokestop. Like that card is just insane. A lot of times it's draw 3. When you're discarding cards, it's usually not even that bad. You got 4 rods, so you can put back energies, whatever. Milling the supporters is what's really annoying.
Yeah.
Um,
I think they had
but
31
yeah,
item cards in their deck, which was like a ton. Like
yeah,
I think like usually Lost Box decks have a little bit less than that, because I know they went up to like fourth switch and like third vacuum. So
yeah.
that just made Pokestop so much better.
Yeah. And especially like a lot of decks don't have very many stadiums. Like most Gardevoir decks had 1 or 2, most Lugia decks had 1 or 2. So when Pokestop just stays in play the whole game, I mean, even like I was testing against Drew with like our Klefki Fluttermane build. If there was just a Pokestop in play, it didn't matter that he was under Klefki lock. He could still draw like 2 cards a turn, and it built up into eventually getting attacks off. So I think that was really good from him. I'm not even sure if it was originally Drew's deck. I'm just kind of calling it his because he did the best. But to whoever came up with that 4 Pokestop idea, that was really good, I think.
Yeah,
You
so
know?
the 4 Pokestop idea, I think that was more or less what they came up with. The Iron Thorns was the
Oh,
one
that was
card.
yeah.
Yeah, so that was definitely, I think, probably the biggest surprise card in the deck. It actually ends up, a lot of people actually ended up coming to the same conclusion. There were plenty of Lost Zone variants that weren't the exact same 60 that did have the one of Thorns. I know that I think Hermione from Finland, I believe someone who I know hit them on the ladder and they were playing the Iron Thorns, and then we kind of like spoke about it. I was like, okay, so there's an Iron Thorns in this Lost Box deck, and like their Lost Zone deck was like significantly different. I think the big thing that separates this version is it seemed that like the majority of the Lost Box decks that were seen success, I think in Japan or in some like the Limitless events, they were playing like double Artisan. Like most of them weren't even playing the
Mhm.
Pokestop variant. So
Yeah.
we kind of took a bunch of ideas from like a bunch of like different like variants of the Lost Zone deck. That's kind of what Drew like wanted to do, and it ended up like working out. I feel like it kind of came to like the perfect list. But yeah, I think the 4 Pokestop definitely separates it. For example, I played against a Lost Zone variant, I think in the second day, and I don't think they played any Pokestop. I think they played 1 or 2 Artisan, and they just had no shot. Something like the
Yeah.
Klefki, something like the Fluttermane just completely stalled them out. However, when I was testing versus the 4 Pokestop variant, they just keep spamming Pokestop. They start to find their vacuums, and it actually becomes really, really scary. So I
Yeah.
do think the 4 Pokestop variant is probably the best way to go, and I think that's really what separated his list from the majority of the other ones, because it seemed a lot of the other builds were a lot more conservative, where this one was just kind of like sending it, right? Like turn 1,
Yeah.
Radiant Greninja hands, turn 2 Sableye, and that's how you win games. So
Yeah. It's a Turbo Lost Box deck, right?
yeah.
It's not a turn 3 Lost Box deck. Yeah. So what do you think about, I mean, these two decks, Guardian, Lost Box, were literally the only decks in the top 8. I think these decks are going to be like the 2 top contenders heading into Worlds, especially Gardevoir. Would you say that's accurate? Like, do you think um, Gardevoir and Lost Box are going to be kind of the like Gardevoir and Lugia of Worlds?
So it is kind of interesting. Now I know this is something that we're gonna tap into later on. I don't know
Mhm.
how good Gardevoir is going to be, simply due to the time constraints, because ties for this year's Worlds are almost effectively losses in a lot of ways. So that
Mm.
personally is my fear with playing something like the Gardevoir deck. I think it's still very strong, and I know people are still going to see some success with it. However, I think that's kind of the risk that you have to take when playing the deck. I think Lost Zone is still going to remain very, very solid. I know that Kyurem has been getting a lot of talk from the new set Shrouded Fable.
Mhm.
However, I think that Lost Box can probably just add in something like a Manaphy and fix that problem. And also, Manaphy also makes the Lost Zone mirror match and
Mirror much
also
better.
Chen Pao significantly better. So I think it just kind of makes sense to play something like that. But I definitely think they will still be very strong. I think that probably Lost Zone might be a little bit stronger, simply because it can finish games significantly faster than something um, like the Gardevoir deck on average. So
Now, here's an interesting question for you. Yes, Manaphy blocks Kyurem, but does that mean you're benching Manaphy in every game you play? Like, if you play against like some random deck, like your opponent flips over C-Pow, like, are you putting, or well, okay, you're putting Manaphy down because it's C-Pow. Okay, if you're playing against Charizard, are you going to bench a Manaphy because they might have a Kyurem in their deck?
that is an interesting question.
Right? Like, it's pretty taxing. Like, you need to get your compies down, right? So if you're putting down Manaphy like every game to like make sure you don't get Kyurem, that's like pretty bad. And then like if you don't, you're just gonna get randomly Kyurem and be
You just
down a game
lose. Yeah, so
and just lose on the spot, right?
that's kind of the thing, is that I'm not 100% sure how many people are actually going to play Kirim. I think that since the deck obviously just like one, I
Just
think that
one,
that's kind
yeah.
of a problem. It's just like, do I think now this is kind of interesting, because I think that the majority of players at Worlds are going to be very highly experienced, and I think maybe
Yeah.
heading into a regional championship, I would be more afraid of random Kirims being thrown into lists. I think at Worlds it might be a little bit different, because I feel like players would just rather play better cards, maybe things like a Jirachi, which could be useful, versus maybe Lasso and Giratina, and also just, you know, like the Radzard variant. Like I think that Jirachi might be a more universal counter to something like the Lost Box, rather than something like the Kyurem, because Kyurem is just such a liability. I mean, the card is completely useless in pretty much every single matchup. So that's kind of the thing, is that I personally, heading into Worlds, would only be benching Manaphy if I was playing in a matchup where I knew that I had, you know, maybe an extra bench slot. And however, if I was, you know, like having debate between, you know, do I want to put down a Sableye in this situation because they could like use like something like the Roxanne, or do I put down Manaphy? I think I'm probably always going to choose to put down Sableye, and if I lose to Kyurem, I lose to Kyurem. So it's a really interesting thing to think about, because we haven't seen as hard of a counter to a specific deck since I think the Tapu Fini that saw play when people were trying to counter Blacephalon. I know that was like a one of card that just kind of destroyed Blounds, right? So, you know, that was always kind of interesting. Yeah. Tomb as well.
Drapion V, bro. Who
I don't know, bro.
at Pokemon hates Mew V
Max?
Mags?
I don't know, bro. Those things didn't do anything to Mew.
Drapion did nothing. Yeah. Tomb, that was an issue. Okay. That was a large issue.
Tomb was definitely an issue, except for the Fusion Strike variant. But yeah, like Drapion didn't really do anything because you just went Roxanne Path KO, or you could also
Lost City. Yeah. Aerodactyl V-Star at 1.2, but
I guess one other thing. Oh, sorry. I guess the argument I'm trying to say is that Tapu Fini was useless versus everything else, right? Where like Spiritomb and Drapion had like some uses and, you know, like some other matchups, so I could understand why people would like choose to play those cards. Whereas as the Tapu Fini, same with the Kyurem, is just completely useless, you know, versus everything else. Yeah.
I guess one other thing, like, if you're going to play a Kyurem or Jirachi in your deck, the Kyurem works when your opponent doesn't know what's going on. Like, if you get to Kyurem your Lost Box opponent in game 1, you're never going to get to Kyurem them in game 2.
Yeah.
Right? Whereas Jirachi is going to have, like, consistent value across, like, a whole series.
Yeah.
I guess another thing...
too. Like, people will find out that you're playing it.
Exactly, right? Like, especially like top players. Like, if Tord has a Kyurem in his deck,
everyone's known by round 1.
Yeah, by round 2, everyone knows Tord has a Kyurem in his deck. So that's another thing. As a Lost Box player at Worlds, something I will say is that if it seems like your opponent's deck has like a horrifically bad Lost Box matchup, I would definitely be more suspicious of a Kyurem. Like, if they're playing, I don't know, maybe like Lugia, where like they kind of just auto lose to the Thorns, then I would be more scary of them just having like a random Kyurem to try and counter it, right? Do you think that makes sense as a Lost Box player?
Yes, I think that decks that, you know, really struggle like versus that deck, I think that Lugia just kind of gets ran over by things like Thorn and Hands. Like, those cards just cause, you know, so many problems. I could definitely see that as well, because you can also use the Jet Energy to push up the Kyurem as well, like pretty efficiently. I could definitely see that, and maybe even like a Lost Zone Giratina, something that, you know, really struggles to like the regular just like Lost Zone variants. Maybe just be like, okay, just like we're gonna chuck in like one of these, Kyurem, and you win the matchup.
And hopefully, that's Lost Tina. That's a good idea. Okay, the other thing I wanted to talk about NAIC wise is Dragapult and how it didn't really see very much success. I mean, Tor did the masterclass on Dragapult. He did end up playing a Dragapult deck, and he was, I guess, the second best Dragapult placing player. We saw another player, I'm sorry, I don't know who it was, but they were playing Regidrago V-Star with the Dragapult, and I think they made top 16. Were you surprised? Jacobi. There we go. Were you surprised by how bad Dragapult seemed to be for this tournament?
Well, from my testing, I tested pretty much every single variant because I think that Dragapult's a, you know, pretty cool card. I tried out the Xatu variant. It just felt really inconsistent. I tried out like the Lost Zone variant. It just didn't feel like I was setting up enough. The deck just felt kind of weak overall, and I felt just like Turbo Lost Zone was just a significantly better deck. The only version of Dragapult I actually got to work was the Pidgeot variant. I pretty much took a Charizard deck, cut all the Charizards, and I pretty much just used that core to make the deck, and the deck felt fine. I think the problem matchups for the deck were specifically Raging Bolt. The Raging Bolt matchup didn't seem like very strong, and I knew that Raging Bolt would probably be the most played or second most played. So I also kind of ran into some problems in those matchups. I'm not surprised the deck didn't do very well. I think the deck is just kind of mediocre in general at the moment. I think Zard might just actually just be a stronger deck, even though they play pretty much the same engines. I also tested some of the Reggie Drago deck as well, and I was pulling off turn 2 Pult much more consistently with that deck. So I almost just came to the conclusion after seeing, like the top 16, my top 32. I think there was also one in 64 and like one in 28. So the deck actually had multiple placements. I kind of just realized that, the Drago variant just felt like a better Pult deck. So that was, kind of my personal conclusion. Tord is just, obviously very, very good at the game. So I'm not surprised. He could have probably taken any tier 2 or 3 deck and probably done well with it.
Yeah.
We've seen that before, but yeah, I'm definitely not surprised to see the deck struggle, especially because of how much, things like the Raging Bolts of the world, and also Lugia is kind of a scary matchup as well. So
Yeah, and I also felt like Gardevoir was pretty good into almost every Dragapult variant I played. That was my biggest like shortcoming with Dragapult was I just felt like couldn't beat Guardy.
I think everyone was ready for the deck too. Everyone
Yeah,
went into the
everyone was
event saying,
ready
I'm
for
going to
it.
beat Dragapult. I think that hurt the deck.
Yeah, and I think everybody also had access to all the lists that Tord gave out in his master class, so people kind of knew what was going on there. Um, and as far as Tord's Dragapult variant goes, I think it's the most interesting. I've put some thought into it and some games as well since NAIC, and I honestly like don't really know why the Dragapult's there. Like in a lot of matchups, you just wish it was more Charizard pieces. Of course, it's good versus stall. Then you have like an attack. Like if you think of it as a Charizard deck and not a Dragapult deck, like you're a Charizard deck and you just like added in this additional tool of Dragapult. It's good versus control because you can like actually do enough damage to like kill things. It's good versus CPOW because you can potentially like get the double kills. But beyond that, like I don't really know what Dragapult DX is doing that Charizard DX can't. And it's just harder to set up. So I wasn't surprised either by kind of the lack of Dragapult success. But the lack of Dragapult success did allow Charizard and CPOW to have some good runs. I know William Azevedo and Pedro Pertusi. I think they both made top 64 with Zard.
I don't think Pedro
And
got,
then,
I think got 128. I could be wrong though.
I got 128. Okay, yeah,
I thought
maybe.
William got 64.
Yeah, William got 64. And then CPOW, I think Nick Moffitt made top 32. And I think Lucas Zing bubbled. I think he was 33rd, actually. So he made top 64. But we had a couple prominent players playing those decks. Did you expect to see those decks do well? Or were you kind of surprised to see that? I mean, they didn't win or anything, but
Correction. Pedro got top 64. My bad.
he got top 64. Okay.
My bad. Yes. I'm not surprised to see Charizard do well. I think that like if we kind of look at it, last formats, Chen Pao was one of Charizard's harder matchups, which took up about 15%. I would say probably 12 to 15% of the format. And Pult is kind of the new, I guess, rough matchup for Charizard, and Pult was not taking up that much. I think Pult was only taking up 7%. I could be wrong, but I kind of looked up, I guess, kind of the matchup spread, and I was like, wait a minute, Charizard's matchup spread arguably gets slightly better statistically. So I was not surprised. I know that William Azevedo and Pedro, I believe, played the same 60 or very close to it. I know they test with each other. I know there was a jamming tower that was played in that list. That card really helps out versus the Gardevoir matchup. I've also played that matchup as well. I played it a couple times. I tied actually both of the Zards, but I didn't really feel like I was in like winning positions. I got kind of lucky in like one of the games because one of them like did not set up very well, and we just kind of like naturally tied. But I felt like the matchup was pretty rough, so I actually think Charizard takes a decent matchup into Gardevoir now, especially with things like the Jamming Tower. You still have Lost Vacuum, so I'm not surprised to see the deck see success, and I think it probably gets significantly better heading into Worlds, simply because I don't think Pult is going to be played very much, simply because of how poorly it did. So Chen Pao's the other one. I think Chen Pao's okay. I think its Gardevoir matchup is probably fine. I believe Keto cut the Manaphy, so there were plenty of I think just like people that were just saying we don't need the Manaphy. I think a lot of the Dragapult lists as well also cut the Manaphy, so just getting turned to Radiant Greninja is just so strong. So that's another thing as well. I'm definitely a little bit more surprised to see CPOW do well, just because I feel like the deck is really inconsistent a lot of the time, and I feel like especially with things like unfair stamp, like hitting the
Yeah.
format, it can be really tough. And then the Lugia matchup as well is significantly harder because of the legacy energy too. So definitely not surprised, but I would say the one that I expected to do well was Zard, and there were plenty in top 64, and I think a couple in top 32 as well.
Yeah. I think what opened the door for these decks is really that they have favorable Gardevoir matchups. And I think like looking forward to Worlds, I mean, I'm definitely looking at Guardy as kind of the deck to beat. And I imagine other players are as well. So I definitely wouldn't be surprised to see more Zard and more CPOW at Worlds. I mean, CPOW has a good Zard matchup as well. So if people are going to be kind of making this anti-Guardy shift, which I imagine they will be, then I could see both of these decks doing well moving forwards, honestly. I mean, I think like Lucas was playing an enhanced hammer in his deck
Oh, he
to
was.
try and combat, the legacy energy,
You can Irida
which is
for it.
interesting. Yeah, you can Irida for it, right? I don't know if that's necessary. You can just like Iron Bundle around it as well, and then you can like either like amp or like C-Pow blow up whatever they send up. So I don't know if you actually need that E-Hammer, but I don't know. He's the board of directors of CPOW, so I'm sure he knows best. But yeah, I guess that's all I really wanted to talk about NAIC wise. Was there anything else you found interesting about the tournament? Any other decks you wanted to talk about?
Looking at them right now, I don't think there was a whole lot else that was really surprising. I think the most, I guess the deck that surprised the most people was probably the Reggie Drago deck. And now that deck gets something, um, like the Kieran, which we will, kind of touch on later on. But I think that was
Mhm.
kind of the biggest surprise. But, yeah, I think we covered everything important.
Cool. All right, let's get into the Worlds format then. There's kind of two major aspects to talk about here. The first thing is the tournament structure, um, which is very unique from anything we've ever seen Worlds wise and just Pokemon tournament in general. Um, it said there's going to be 8 rounds in day one, and you're going to need 18 match points to advance to day two, meaning 6-2 or 5-0-3, at which point we're going to play 3 or 4. It looked like more likely to be 4 rounds in day two, and then we're going to be cutting to a top 8 with no bubble, meaning anyone with the same record as 8th place will play an asymmetrical bracket to determine who makes top 8. What do you make of this format? Initial thoughts?
You know, I think it's a little bit strange. It definitely, kind of caught me off guard. And when they removed the day two stipend invites, I think a lot of people assume that they would just run worlds like a regional where you have to go 6-2-1 and then you advance to day two. And then, like after that, like then they play like 5 or 6 rounds and they cut to top 8. I was expecting that to probably be the most reasonable way. However, this, definitely surprised me. I mean, we've seen in the past where like you need to go like I think over the previous years, 6-2 was enough to make it into day two. I think that was like pretty standard. Was 6-2 or 5-2. I know like at previous worlds, that's kind of what it was. I think actually specifically last year you had to go 6-2 to make it into day two.
Yep.
So that part isn't necessarily really changed. It's just the second day is kind of bizarre because you keep the record from the day before, whereas I think in the previous years you just reset, right? So
Yeah, you just got 6 wins and
yeah,
then you were
6 wins
good,
reset
right?
0-0, right? And it was kind of like a giant league cup, which I personally wasn't a major fan of that system as well. But
Mhm.
this system is definitely interesting. I think a lot of people have been, kind of talking about like the tie problem, like ties kind of feel like losses, I feel like, to a lot of people. So that's kind of an interesting discourse we were seeing. I know that some top players are really fond of it. I know that you are someone who has a pretty positive outlook on it. And then I've seen some other people as well who are like, I don't know if
Mhm.
this system is actually great. I personally don't really have an opinion yet. I think it's, definitely kind of different and strange, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. We'll kind of have to wait and see exactly how it feels. But I think the best thing about it is the asymmetrical. Asymmetricals is absolutely fantastic. I'm really happy about that because we've seen so many situations where um, myself included, I've bubbled in the past like 2 years. I've gotten like ninth or 10th at like 4 regionals. So not
Yeah.
having to deal with that feels awesome. So that is, definitely really, really nice, especially like with the prize pool that's just, like so large this event. I think it like, yeah, it just makes sense personally. So.
Yeah, I definitely like the asymmetrical card here. I'll give my my pitch on why I like this format so much. Okay, so first of all, asymmetrical cut is amazing. I think it's nice to have a chance to play for your spot instead of like it coming down to luck with like resistance or whatever. You have a bracket, right? You get to play a game in order to try and make top cut. Additionally, I think it's going to discourage people from like kind of like scooping their last rounds and like giving people kind of free ins to top eight, right? Because like if you're 10-1, for example, you could probably scoop that round and get someone else into cut, but then you don't want to be a part of that bubble potentially or like the bracket. So I think less people are going to get free ins. Also, I think it's going to make ties a lot less valuable. Like one tie is still good. I ran like a tournament simulator, and it told me, I mean, it's a simulator, so who knows, but it estimated that there was going to be, I think, 6 people or maybe 8 people at 10-2. And that was going to be the bubble, and there's going to be like 4 spots available. So of course you want to be like avoiding that if you can. So going like 10-1-1, like that first tie still has value in order to like guarantee your spot. But people who play slowly or like who play this kind of like 1-0 strategy, I think are going to see like a diminishing return on that kind of play because their second tie, their third tie, or just, well, I mean, I guess the third tie kind of brings you back, but multiple ties are going to be way less valuable in this format, right? Which I like. I think it just leads to more Pokemon being played. And I think if everyone is properly motivated to actually finish games, then more games will finish, which I think is a good thing.
We can all finish games. I know all the top players who tie a bunch. We can all finish games. We just have to concede early. We just have to play a little bit faster. Price checking does not need to take 5 minutes. I know that was a major discussion as well. I personally think that price checking should only be taking 30 seconds or less, but we see it on stream go on for ages and ages and ages and ages. And this also happens as well when you're playing regular games off stream too. So yeah, we can all finish our games. Come on, let's go. Let's all finish our games at Worlds. We're all trying to win.
And of course, like the problem is like if the judges are gonna allow a minute and a half to prize check, right? Like
they don't care.
There's
no
like,
rule. There's no rule, and it blows my mind. Sorry. Anyways, I'm very passionate
it's
on
annoying,
this.
Right? Yeah. And like if your opponent's doing it, like you're gonna do it too, right? Like if my opponent like took a minute and a half and they've got all 6 prizes on their notepad, and then I don't do it, which sometimes I don't, even though I probably should. But you're at a disadvantage, right? Your opponent has like a little leg up on you. They have additional information, and then like you might get screwed by not knowing that you prized one of your nest balls or something later in the game. So, so yeah, I wish judges would maybe crack down on that a bit. I don't know. It's really hard because like if you give people less time on their first deck search, then like their second, third, fourth deck searches are
they get
just
extended
gonna, like,
by like 5 or 10 seconds, and then it just kind
of yeah. So like, would it really shorten the length of a game? I don't know. I think so. I'm not sure. I think maybe like I think if you take a minute and a half on your first deck search, the judges should be very on you about your next deck searches being quick, right? Like if you take a minute and a half, you write down all 6 of your prizes, and you play an earthen vessel, right? That deck search should take like actually 2 seconds. Like you are getting 2 psychic energies or whatever deck you're playing, right? You're getting 2 energies. There's not much of a decision going on. The decision should probably be made before you even play the card. So there's no reason to be like flicking through your deck. Even a full flick through the deck is like, well, what's the point? Just get your cards, take them out. 2-second deck search. Seriously.
I think a perfect example of this, I actually saw this clip of Azul. He was playing on stream, and his first search took like probably like a minute, maybe like a minute and a half, and then the next like 2 or 3 actions were just like this, bang, bang, bang. Like he didn't take like 15 to 20 seconds. He just went quick, 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 and I was like, that's the way to do it. However, the problem that we have right now is they're spending 45 seconds or maybe like a minute, and then they're taking every other search 10 to 15 seconds, and like that's where like the time like quickly like starts to add up. So I'm okay like if they take kind of like an elongated search on the first one, but just go quick. But then again, people just don't do that at that point, and it's just not something that I feel like is being heavily enforced as of right now. Like I think it took Keto doing it on stream for so long to finally like have that come back to get him with the DPL, I think in game 3, but like he could have been called way earlier. So like it's just that it just isn't being enforced as much as it should be, and I definitely think that there's some rules that could potentially be changed moving forward.
Yeah. Especially like with keto specifically. I mean, I think I saw Josh talking about it on Twitter, but he had several warnings, right? And I'm not 100% sure if those warnings come with a time extension, but I feel like if you get a warning for slow play, a time extension should be applied to the match. Do you know, like, does that happen?
So I have ran into a couple situations where I've either been sitting next to someone or my opponent has been doing it. And sometimes what will happen is a judge will come over and they say, you are getting a slow play warning. We are going to add an extra 1 or 2 minutes. I
Okay, so
personally
they
have
do.
seen this happen before. I personally have never ran into that problem with myself, but I've seen this happen multiple times to other people. Yeah, judges are trying to get like more on top of it. I actually spoke to a judge as well, and they said I think at NAIC they had a professor seminar, and that was one of the discussions was the deck searches that take a minutes like that was
Mhm.
a discussion from what I was told. So hopefully that means they're kind of starting to have that discussion, being like, okay, is this actually something that we should allow, or should it be maybe like 15 seconds, right? Because that's what it technically says in the rulebook is 15 seconds or less. There is nothing in the rulebook from what I know that says on that first search you are given 45 seconds, 60 seconds, like a minute and a half. Like I don't believe
Mhm.
there's anything in the rule book. And I think that judges have finally started to realize, and I know like on social media and stuff, I think that Robin Scholes made a post about like the finals match and just, like how long those first like 2 turns took. I think it was a combined like 4 or 5 minutes of
5,
deck
yeah,
searching,
5 minutes.
which is just
Yeah.
insane and shouldn't happen. So I'm glad that we're finally starting to kind of have that discussion, because I think it's been going on for quite some time. And I think that this was really the first year that it got pretty egregious. So
Hmm.
hopefully, moving forward, this is something that, potentially gets changed, or they at least give us some, type of ruling on it. Like at least, like put it in the rule book that says on that very first search, you can take in like 45 seconds. But the problem is they don't even put it in their rule book. So it creates this really weird situation where what is actually legal and what's not, because they don't tell us what's legal and what's not. It's entirely up to
Yes.
the judge's discretion.
Yeah, it should be standardized in some way. Either we're allowed, I mean, I've been told a minute and a half. Either we're allowed a long deck search or we're not. I feel like hopefully, I mean, the problem is Pokemon never communicates anything with us.
Yeah.
Like they're never gonna issue any kind of statement on this. Like they might somehow communicate it to the judging team, but they're like we'll never know about it, which is really annoying. So for now, it is what it is. Um, yeah, for
Yeah.
now it is what it is, I guess. But the other thing we've got to talk about as far as the worlds goes is the new set, Shrouded Fable. Have you taken a look at these cards, Gabe?
Yeah, I've taken a look at some of them. Specifically, the Pheasantipity card is definitely very, very interesting. I've also looked, I think the majority of people have been talking about the Kirim, Neutral
Hmm.
Center, Xerosic as well has been getting a lot of talk too. I think the set doesn't have necessarily any game-changing cards. I don't think there's going to be, some type of archetype that's built off these cards. It has kind of a bunch of tech cards that I'm currently struggling to figure out, okay, should this card actually be put um like is it worth like that like 60 a slot? I think that's like the
Yes.
I think that's the majority of the set is a bunch of bad cards and then a couple cards that are like, okay, is this like 60th card, like is this spot like going to be committed to something like the Zoroark or something like the Kirim, right? So that's kind of the interesting thing that I'm kind of trying to figure out. But I think the set definitely has some potential and will probably have a little bit of an effect. It's kind of like the Pokemon Go set where we saw heading into 2022 Worlds, we had Radiant Zard. I know that card made its debut at Worlds, got top 16, right? I think Ross Cawthon
Hmm.
got really close to top 80, and there were actually plenty of really solid players that ended up playing that card. I don't think there's anything in this set as strong as something like the Radiant Zard, but there's definitely a lot of interesting things.
All right. Okay. So I'm gonna go through the list, and there's gonna be a couple cards. You might not even know what these cards do, but I'm gonna tell you that I think have potential. Okay. That doesn't necessarily mean these cards are gonna be like busted upon release, but the first card I want to talk about is Dusknor. The ability on Dusknor is that it can knock itself out and place 13 damage counters on one of your opponent's Pokemon. Now, we've seen how powerful self KO Pokemon can be, right? We played a deck that relied on my Milotic to knock itself out, and then you can use comeback cards like Ace Trainer, right? So, I mean, this card doesn't work with Unfair Stamp, but you could like Dusknor knock yourself out and play aggressive Ionos, or something like that. Do you think this card could have any potential, either immediately or in the long term in our format?
So I think the biggest problem is that it's a stage 2. I think maybe if it was a stage 1, it would be a little bit
Oh, hold on,
easier
hold on.
to.
The stage 1 can do the same thing, but it's 5 damage counters.
Interesting. Okay, that's kind of cool. Um, I mean, it's probably good against Gardevoir because you can knock out their damaged guys. Maybe, right? I just don't know exactly what you would have to pair it up with. I truly do not know. I think it's a cool card though. I mean,
Okay.
13 damage counters is, quite a bit. Maybe you're, kind of cooking something up, but I haven't started cooking on this card yet.
All right, here's the chef's special, Gabe. So what we do, we Dusknoir. We knock out our opponent's support Pokemon, all right? So you're playing against Gardevoir. We Dusknoir twice, kill all their Kirlias, all right? Then we like Iono them. Or maybe we get to unfair stamp them because they knock something out. We go unfair stamp. And then we go like Luxray. Or we go Arbok EX.
Lock it
All
in
right.
for
We
Worlds.
lock in Arbok EX Dusknoir, discard their whole hand, and then somehow hand lock them. There's another stage too that like rearranges the top cards of their deck. Yo, I'm trying to recreate the old like Pidgey control decks, if you remember those. But
Yes.
I don't think it's quite there. Maybe I gotta go back to culinary school on this one. We can move on here. We can go. Okay,
It's a cool card.
Slitherwing. This card is pretty cool, pretty simple. Fighting colorless, 20 plus 120. If your opponent has a future Pokemon, I mean, this card just reads Fighting colorless, kill Iron Hands EX. Do you think maybe like a Lost Box deck could play this, or are there just better options?
I think Lost Box could maybe play this. However, I think that you might have some better options. Maybe just attacking with like the Ursaluna is just like more effective in the long run. I'm not 100% sure. This card might replace Sandy Shocks and Raging Bolt potentially. I'm not 100. Actually, yeah, because it's an ancient Pokemon, right? Is it an ancient or not?
So it's an ancient. The other attack on the card, which is potentially relevant, fighting, colorless, 130, discard 2 energy. That's significantly worse than a Sandy
Yeah.
Shocks attack. Um, it would be good against an Iron Hands. I mean,
How much
Raging
HP
Bolt
does it
doesn't
have?
really care,
130.
but 140, 140.
So it would be pretty good against Miraidon because they wouldn't be able to one shot it back with Iron Hands potentially. Now versus Future Box, it wouldn't be as good obviously because they have things like Capsule. Actually, Miraidon might
Also,
actually play Capsule anyway, so they might be able to one shot you back
mhm.
regardless. But I think it's a fun card. Maybe it's a one of tech, but I don't know.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised to see it in some Lost Box decks, but the Ursaluna, I mean, if there's like a specific situation where like you need to kill a hands with a one prizer, it could maybe be good, but I think Ursaluna kind of does the job. All right, now we're gonna get on to probably the strongest cards of this set. I'm gonna kind of go over them all at once. Ogie Dogie EX, one colorless, search your deck for 2 basic darks, put it on him, and he's now poisoned. Crazy Chain, dark, colorless, 130. If he's poisoned, 130 more. Now I'm going to read another card because they synergize together. We got the Peturant EX, ability controlling chains. Once during your turn, you can switch one of your benched dark Pokemon, except any Peturant EX, with your active. If you do, the new active Pokemon is poisoned. And it has a relevant attack to 2 dark energies, and it does 60 for each prize card your opponent's taking. So we have kind of the making of a EX dark deck, basically a dark type Raging Bolt deck. That's the way I see it. One more tool you have available to you is Monkey Dory EX. Dark, colorless, 190. It can't attack during the next turn. And the ability is that if you have any Peturunt EX in play, it only gives up 1 prize card. So you have a 210 HP option that only gives up 1 prize. What do you think about these 3? I don't know. I don't know what the lore is on these cards. They're connected in some way, but what do you think of these dark type Pokemon?
I don't know if they're better than Raging Bolt. I think that's the question you have to ask yourself. Dark Patch is still legal, right? And they're not
Yeah.
ancient Pokemon, so you can't Sawdust to them as
Yeah.
well. So
Oh, you do get there's a supporter, Janine's Secret Technique. Search your deck for 2 energies, attach them to your dark Pokemon. If you attach it to your active, it's poisoned. Something like that.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah,
I guess you can search it out with things like maybe gear or something like Luminion. Um, I'm not 100% sure. I'd have to put some games into it. I personally haven't really tested with it, but I think in theory it does have some synergy. But I'm just not 100% sure if it's better than, I guess, kind of like the other um
like
blow
two
stuff
prize
up
beat
decks,
stick
right?
deck. Yeah.
Exactly.
I think what makes this one interesting to me is the Monkey Dory. Like I feel like all the other two prize beat stick decks can't beat Gardevoir. Um, and this Monkey Dory like gives me some hope that you can maybe compete because like you can one shot a Gardevoir EX with the Monkey Dory. It's got a decent amount of HP, so it does take a little bit to actually knock it out. Um, so you can trade like 2 for 1 with a Gardevoir EX. I don't know if that's really enough. They can just ignore it and like kill your other two prize Pokemon. But I'm definitely interested by this deck to see if maybe it replaces Raging Bolt. Um, I feel like this Peturant EX also could have other applications. I don't know if you've thought about it at all, but this could go in a Charizard deck. And you could never lose to stall. Well, you could probably still lose to stall, but you would always be able to switch in your Charizard EX, right? Like if your opponent's trying to like do some block lack shenanigans.
Like a better
Um,
Gengar.
yeah, like a better Gengar, it's a basic. And then also, because you're poisoning yourself, you could potentially play the other new trainer from the set, the tool card, Binding Mochi. If your Pokemon it's attached to is poisoned, its attacks do 40 more damage. So then potentially, even if your opponent's taking 0 prizes, you could do 220 damage with the Charizard EX by comboing it with the Peturunt. What do you think of that idea?
That's kind of cool. I think it could potentially. I mean, it is a tool though, so you might run into some situations where you'd rather have like max belt on something like Zard, but I think it might have some potential. It's just, can you find a deck that is okay poisoning itself? I think
Mm-hmm.
that's like the biggest question you kind of have to ask yourself. But I think there's a lot of like really um cool combos in this set. I'm just not 100% sure how viable they're going to be, but there definitely seems to be something there. And like I think they've, really tried to make a conscious effort to make these cards somewhat playable. So that's
Mm-hmm.
a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems like we got a lot of potential in a very small set. I mean, um, the next card I'll talk about is probably the best card in the set, I think, unless I'm forgetting about something. Pheasantipede EX, you mentioned it earlier. It's a reprint of Orcorio GX, I believe it was. If one of your Pokemon was knocked out during the last turn, its ability says you can draw 3 cards. You can't use the ability more than once each turn. Um, what do you think about this? What is the best way to use Serendipity EX?
Yeah, so
And will it
this
see play?
Yeah, so this card's going to be really good in decks like Future Hands, I think. I think that Future Hands is definitely a deck that doesn't really have a draw support line, which runs into situations where if they just Roxanne you, you oftentimes just like your board completely falls apart. This card's also pretty good in Lost Box as well. Its attack is actually pretty good. I believe for 3 energy, it snipes 100 damage to one of your opponent's bench Pokemon, which is not
Yep.
terrible. Um,
Can hit active too.
Oh, cool. Yeah. So I think this card is good. I think this card will definitely be included in some decks. I wouldn't be surprised if decks like Miraidon, Future Hands, pretty much any deck that
Yeah.
doesn't
All
really
the
have.
turbo decks. Raging Bolt, surely we'll have one of these.
Yep,
Um,
100% lock that card in for sure for these lists. Things like Gardevoir probably don't need it just because Screamtail is just a better snipe. And you also have, things like your refinements of the world. So you like already have a draw engine. But I think in Lost Box, it definitely has a lot of potential because one of the main ways that Lost Box can lose games is getting hit by an unfair stamp at the end of the game or like a Roxanne.
yeah.
And those, situations often can cause, like Lost Box's board states to fall apart. So when you're going down to maybe 2 or 1 prize card, you can just slap that thing on the board and say, okay, I'm gonna give you something like Boss's Orders, and you're not using something like the Roxanne, so that's good. And it kind of just forces them to have a little bit more as well. So I think that this card is really good. I think it's gonna see play in plenty of decks, and I'm really excited to see what actually is able to utilize it the best.
It almost seems like a better Mew EX. Like we see Mew EX in Future Hands, sometimes in Raging Bolt, sometimes
Energy
in Lost
Drago as well
Box.
plays it. So
Yeah, right. Where instead of drawing until you have 3, you just get to draw 3. I was going to pitch this card in Gardevoir too. I mean, sometimes your hand size gets low with Gardevoir. Ultra Ball becomes like a really hard card to
that's
actually
true.
play. Refinements, right, cause you to discard cards from your hand. So I could definitely see this in a Gardevoir deck as well, potentially. And of course, any deck where your 1 prize Pokemon are getting knocked out, you're going to get additional activations of this ability. Um, which makes it seem like a good fit in those decks. The problem is if you're a 1-prize deck, you don't really want to put a 210 HP 2-prizer on your bench. It'll probably just get knocked out.
Yeah. Solid card. I definitely would give it an 8 out of 10.
8 out of 10. Yep, sounds about right. Okay, this next one I think is pretty bad. I think some other people have talked about it. Genesect ability, if it has a Pokemon tool on it, your opponent can't play any Ace-Specs from their hand. I mean, we saw, I think it was a Spiritomb in the last Ace-Spec format. I don't know. I think that card saw like a little bit of play, but like not a lot. What do you make of Genesect? Is this card playable?
I think in the past when there were things like G Booster, very impactful, like Ace-Spec, specifically tool cards, that would oftentimes sit on the field for a long time. Like that card saw some play, and I think maybe like Big Basics back in the day, like it saw like a little bit of play. However, I think now, with the power creep, this ability just isn't as powerful. I think also bench space back then. I feel like you had a lot more of it. And I think nowadays decks are a lot more built on setup. Like you're not really attacking a lot of the time on like that very first turn for the majority of decks in the formats. Whereas like back then you might only have like 2 or 3 things on the bench. So you would have bench space for it. But now I don't think you necessarily do. So I personally don't think this card is very good. I don't think there's any Ace-Specs in the format that are degenerate enough to warrant playing this card. So yeah, that's personally my opinion.
It also wouldn't even block Legacy Energy. Like it just says that your opponent can't play them from their hand, right? I think the old Spiritomb said like they had no effect. But like you could just Archeops out your Legacy Energy. I think that's kind of the only one that can really still be played through the Genesect. Or they could also just like Lost Vacuum the tool off your Genesect and then play their Ace-Spec anyways. So yeah, I think this card will be pretty bad. There might be like some niche situation where like one deck can't deal with a specific Ace-Spec in a specific deck and like it randomly sees play, but otherwise it's going to my bulk box. All right, the next card we can talk about, I mean, we've already talked about it a bunch, but Kyurem. The ability says if your opponent has a card in their discard pile with Colress in its name, its attack can be used for 1 colorless. And then its attack is like 5 energies. But if they have the Colress, it's 1 energy. Discard all energy from this Pokemon, and it does 110 to 3 of your opponent's Pokemon. I mean, obviously this card's going to be good. We kind of talked about how if your deck has a terrible Lost Box matchup, then you might want to consider playing this card. But it's a bit gimmicky. One other thing we can mention is that Regidrago V-Star can copy this attack for Grass, Fire against any deck, whether they have a Chorus in their discard or not. The problem being you have to discard all your energies off of your Regidrago. Maybe since we've talked about this card in the Lost Box context, talk about this card in a Regidrago context. How do you think this deck will help Regidrago, if at all?
So the problem with this card in something like Regidrago is that your matchups against Lost Box and Gardevoir are already fine. So I think that this is kind of a win more card, something that you don't necessarily need. Also from my testing with the Regidrago deck, you burn a lot of resources pretty early. So using this attack on like the second turn of the game could just potentially lose you the game, because then you have to find the next turn double energy switch. You just kind of need a lot. So in my personal opinion, the card is probably better as a Lost Box counter, but then again, your Regidrago deck should already beat the Lost Zone variants, because you should be able to hit the turn 2 Dragapult relatively easily. I think the card is cool. I need to look more at the format and see if there's other like uses, like maybe there's like specific matchups where just, you know, putting 110 on 3 different things sets up some, you know, like really important math. I'm not 100% sure. Maybe it's okay versus like Ancient Box, where you can put 110 onto all of them and then use the Noivern to sweep them, because you can actually kind of lose to Ancient Box if they get double counter catcher or they start to mill you with the Great Tusk. But I don't think the card is exceptional in this deck, because the matchups would be good against you should already be pretty favorable versus.
I could definitely see, like as a Gardevoir player, I could definitely see myself getting hit by this Kyurem, like go, Regidrago, Kyurem, and like they kill all my Curlias, and then I just go like unfair stamp, pass, and then like just eventually come back. Yeah, they just lose. Like they just can't attack, and then eventually like I think Regidrago has a big retreat cost,
3.
so eventually 3, right? So you just come in with like Screamtail, you can attack their bench, and like they have nothing. So I could definitely see a game playing out like that.
Yeah.
What else we got to talk about? We talked about the Mochi already. There's 2 supporter cards. I don't know how good these cards are. They look interesting at the very least. Cassiopeia, you can only use it when it's the last card in your hand. I mean, we saw Maxie's Hidden Ball Trick and Archie's Ace in the Hole as had this effect or this cost kind of, and they were busted, but they were much better. This one, you search your deck for up to 2 cards and put them into your hand. Not as good as putting a stage 2 Pokemon onto your board on the first turn of the game. What do you make of this card? How could you enable it? What context would it make sense to play it, if any?
I don't think it's very good. I think that Archie's and Maxie's kind of broke the game. I think actually one ended up getting banned and expanded just because of how like powerful it is. This card doesn't break any rules of evolution, so it's just not the same. Obviously, I don't really know any deck that could really utilize it because there's no card in format. The problem with Skwovet is that you don't know the card that you're going to draw off the top of the deck, so that card doesn't work when you're trying to get
hold on. There's also a stadium in the set that says hold on, let me look at it. I think so you put a card from your hand on top of your deck. So you could go, if you have Cassiopeia in hand and the stadium in play, we're cooking.
Yes.
You can then put the Cassiopeia on top of your deck, squove it into it, and then get any 2 cards.
Maybe it's
the
cool.
problem is, the problem is then you have like nothing to work with, right? Like if like you just have 2 cards.
The biggest issue is that if you want to find it consistently, you have to probably play 3 or 4, because if you play this card as like a one of, then you're not going to find it enough. And then if you play, 2, 3, or 4 of the card, then you're going to draw into it in situations where you can't even use it. So there are plenty of situations. You can't really build an entire deck around this card, I think, as well. I don't really think there's like that many archetypes that could utilize it. And like this is not some
I think it's just not strong enough to want to build a deck around. Like 2 cards, like I could just play a research. Like if I'm gonna go through all this trouble of like Skwovet and the stadium, I could also just play like a Cipher, right? Like I just Cipher Maniac any 2 cards to the top of my deck, Skwovet or something, like the barrel, draw them.
Searching for 2 cards just isn't as good as it used to be. And I think that people see these effects and they're like, oh, like this like would have been broken maybe 6 or 7 years ago. Nowadays, like you just draw so many cards that these effects just aren't really as good as they used to be. Like they're still solid effects, but I think the drawback is, definitely too extreme. And I just don't think you can consistently pull it off to the point where you could actually build a deck around it. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe someone's going to break the format at Worlds and they're going to have this, crazy combo. But but I think Cypher might just be literally better.
I do too. I think it just is better. You can keep cards in your hand. Okay, this next supporter, I think has a little more potential. On the surface, it looks a little weak. So Colress's Tenacity, search your deck for a stadium and an energy card, reveal them, and put them into your hand. Now this can get special energies, but this does count as a Colress. So if your opponent is playing the Kyurem, you do get hit by Kyurem if you have one of these in your discard pile. Gabe, do you think there's a archetype that could use this card? Maybe a control variant, something else that could utilize the part that lets you get special energies? Maybe this card is just for later.
Control could definitely use it. I think that Control could maybe play this card. I don't know if Stall would use it, but I think Control would probably be the main archetype that will find some use for it. I think that Control has a lot of space. You could probably find room for this card. I don't really think, though, that there's any other meta deck that I can think of as of right now that could really, I guess, like, utilize it. Have you thought of anything? Because I haven't thought of anything, I guess, just, like, right off the top of my head.
No. I mean, it also gets the Stadium, which is, like, interesting. I think this card, again, just doesn't do enough. Like, I could just play research, draw 7, probably hit my special energy. Like, if I'm playing, like, some kind of deck, like, I mean, Jet Energy and, like, Double Turbo seem like kind of the best ones, but, like, they're not even that good. But I could see this card becoming good later, like, if a new special energy comes out, or, like, an archetype that, like, really needs to, like, play a bunch of Jet Energy or something. Like, maybe you got your, like, Palafin deck, you want to use Jet Energy, Chorus's Tenacity. Get a stadium too, but yeah, this card doesn't blow me away either. And then I think, actually we got a couple more. All right, the A-Spec Stadium Neutral Center, prevent all damage done to Pokemon that don't have a rule box by attacks from your opponent's Pokemon EX and Pokemon V. if this card is in your discard pile, it cannot be put into your hand or shuffled into your deck. Originally, I like misunderstood this card and I thought it was busted. Because I thought it just said that like Pokemon without a rule box can't be damaged. But it does not. That's not what it does. You're only immune from Pokemon EX and Pokemon V. So in my head, I'm just like, okay, why don't I just have a Mimikyu in the active? You can't Lost Vacuum a Mimikyu. So, what do you make of this neutral center? Do you think a control deck might play this deck, or like maybe a Lost Box deck, or like an Ancient Box deck might decide to play a neutral center? It would protect you from Iron Hands. What do you think of that?
The only problem is that specifically in decks like Control or Stall, you probably need Hero's Cape anyways, and since it's an A-spec you, it's probably not worth it. I don't think the card is good. I mean, it's like it's a stadium that can just get bumped.
Too frail.
Yeah, it's just too frail. Like you don't really gain anything like directly from it. It might be good against a couple decks, but I just don't think it has the usage that you would want. Maybe in the future it becomes better. I truly don't know. But I don't think it's anything special.
And then we got two more cards. Night Stretcher. We were talking about this before. You said this card has some potential. It's an item card. Put a Pokemon or a basic energy card from your discard pile into your hand. Tell me why you might play this instead of a Super Rod.
Well, so for Gardevoir specifically, you sometimes run into situations where you lose the dark energy and you really need to find it. Whereas with something like Super Rod, you have to Super Rod the energy back, then use something like the Earthen Vessel, which oftentimes you're not able to pull off that combo. With something like the Night Stretcher, you can just, find that dark energy right back potentially. Maybe you play double Monkey Dory now and just like only one dark energy just because you have Night Stretcher. So if they knock out the monkey, they can just use something like Artisan, get the second monkey down, and then use the Night Stretcher to get the dark energy back. I think this card is decent. I think this is definitely a better card than people are giving it credit for. I don't think it's amazing, but I think it might have a spot in Gardevoir, maybe Lost Zone Toolbox. Maybe it like replaces the fourth Super Rod, but then again, Super Rod's really, really important in that deck.
Yeah. It's good with Gate, right? Like having the energies in your deck is actually an asset most of the time.
Yeah, I think with Gardevoir, that's probably the one deck that I can think of as of right now. I'm like, okay, this actually might be worthwhile to put in because it also gets back stage 1 and stage 2s, which is, really, really nice. Like maybe you need something like that Curlia back on the field. Maybe they use something like Radiant Greninja or Sableye to knock one out, and you still had a Ralts on the field. Then you can just use the Night Stretcher and get that back. So I think it has potential. I think in some situations it could be quite good, but it's not like amazing or anyway. It's just like okay.
That's interesting. Because, yeah, like in Gardevoir, Curlias can be hard to find, especially as they're dying. So, being able to just pull it right back to your hand, it does seem kind of good. So maybe we will see some Night Stretcher. All right, the last card. I think this card's busted. I'm not quite sure how or why or in what decks, but Xerosik's Plan. Your opponent discards cards from their hand until they have 3. We saw control decks in the past play Hue, which said that both players discarded cards until they have 5. Now this deck puts them all the way down to 3, and you don't have to discard. Is this a control card? Is this just a good card? Or is it a bad card? I mean, surely you don't think this is a bad card. What do you think of Xerosik's Plan?
I think it's pretty decent in decks that play Pidgeot, specifically in Charizard, just because you have a lot of turns where like you don't really need to be playing a supporter because you have things like the Bibarel that are like already finding you things. So I think specifically in Charizard, it's going to definitely have a spot in it. In Control, it's definitely interesting. I guess it's actually really good against Stall as well because Stall, kind of needs to build up those massive hands like to be able to continue like the penny loops, the counter catcher. So something like Xerosic could just kind of instantly win you the game versus that deck. Kind of like what I said though at the very beginning is we're kind of faced with a lot of cards that are decent, but is it actually worth adding something in like the Xerosic, and is something like Xerosic more effective than an Eerie? I think that's a conversation that some people are kind of thinking about is like, okay, do you play Xerosic and Zard or do you play the Eerie? Because if they have a big hand, then Eerie's probably going to get 2 cards that are really strong anyways, and you also get that choice as well. So I think the card is decent. I don't think it's broken in any way. It does really good against control and stall decks for sure. Probably more against stall, like just because they legitimately build up to like 30 card hands. But against the rest of the format, I don't think it's exceptional. I think it's just an okay card.
I do like this card in stall decks simply because like if you're playing Snorlax, your opponent can like Iono and it takes forever to beat them whenever they're like spamming Iono. Whereas if you have one Xerosik's Plan, you probably change, like you're playing it's like a Future Hands deck, for example. They have 4 Ionos or like a Gardevoir deck or something. You have them fully locked. It can take like 15 minutes to actually deck them out. Whereas with the Xerosic, you could probably do it in 5.
Yeah.
What do you think of that? Do you think that's a valid reason to play a Xerosic? Like technically, you're just winning a game that you've already won faster. So it's like, is that even worth playing?
I don't think so.
You don't think so, eh?
Yeah, well, I mean, like if your goal is to try and win a game faster, like it depends on like I guess like what specific deck. Are you saying with stall? You're trying
Yeah,
to
like if you're playing like Snorlax stall,
I don't think you want to finish games faster though. That's the thing. I think you just want to finish a super long
like finish one
first game.
game.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like that's pretty much the entire strategy of stall and control decks is to win the first game. They're not really trying to finish 3 games in a set. So I don't necessarily think you'd be trying to beat your opponent quicker. So yeah.
That's an interesting perspective. I mean, it could potentially open up. I mean, you might still not be fast enough to win 3 games with this card, and at that point, then yeah, the card is just useless. Yeah, and then yeah, if this card is more effective than an Eerie against Lost Box, like if you're a Lost Box player and you have 10 cards in your hand, isn't Eerie hitting harder than the Xerosic, do you think? Or do you think the Xerosic would be better?
I think if they have like a 15 or 20 card hand, then I definitely think that Xerosic is probably going to hit harder. But if they have like a 6 or 7 card hand, then I don't think Xerosic will hit as hard. I actually do think the card definitely could have some use in stall, specifically for your matchups like Lugia. Sometimes when you play versus Lugia, they just start to draw pass and they try and get the combo piece of a Stadium Bump and a Jet Energy. And sometimes they clump up like 3 or 4 energies in their hand because a lot of the time they just start to draw pass over and over and over and over and over again, and their hand gets to like 15 to 20 cards. So specifically in that situation, if you used something like the Xerosic, you're going to hit an energy most likely because if they have 4 or 5 in the hand, which oftentimes once you lock them, it becomes like this really awkward like stalemate where they just keep kind of just like building up their hand. And in that situation, Xerosic is really good. But I think like I could definitely see like stall playing like 2 Eerie 1 Xerosic. I don't think it would be like a heavier split than that. I don't think it's worth 2 slots in your deck just because I'd rather commit to like consistency cards. But yeah.
Yeah. All right. I mean, that's all I got as far as notable cards from the set. I think we're just gonna wrap up our podcast there. I guess this is our first episode. Thanks to everyone who listened. And we'll catch you guys in the next one. Gabe, anything else?
Shout out to Game Grid. They sponsor both of us. The goats. Make sure to go check out the link
Shout
in
out
the
Joe.
description. Yeah, no, shout out Joe. So make sure to go check out the link in the description. Get all your trading card game needs. And yeah, no, we're excited to be hopefully getting some stuff out at least once every week or once every 2 weeks. So yeah.
All right.
Peace out.